playing in the microbiota world, especially because prebiotic can bring specific nutrients which could then promote specific microbiota or help specific strains to synthesize specific metabolites. And I think that here it's a big advantage of prebiotic compared to other categories of products in the X-biotic generation, because microbiota could remain exactly the same from one situation to another one, but because of specific nutrients and condition you are providing through prebiotic, you can then help this strands or this microbiota to synthesize very specific molecule, which then will have beautiful benefits for the hosts. So I think that here, playing in this market, prebiotic could be a big advantage because of that. And we have also other advantages like protection or reactivation of probiotics when we are combining prebiotic with prebiotics. And it's very specific from prebiotic activities that can help in order to protect the probiotic through the gut and the stomach stage. We have also a field which is explored for the last decade in the scientific world, which is very interesting, I think, is that how much prebiotic mechanism can explain some specific health benefit, which was very well known in the past. And then mechanism was not exactly fully understood. For example, we have some specific polyphenols which are not degraded during the digestive tract and which reach the gut at the end, the colon stage. And then here, because of specific fermentation or metabolization, you have a new release of new compound, which can cross again the mucosal layer and bring nice and new activities. So I think that it's a new stage in order to explain, for example, nice activities from polyphenols in UTI, or why not, because of proanthocyanidins, big molecular weight, which are degraded in the colon and then can cross the microbiota layer. But we have also a new field opened recently with, for example, omega-3. Those compounds are already well known. The benefit at the end is well known, but the microbiota stage is something which is rather new and then can support and explain new mechanism of action of those molecules, as well as also open new field of articulation like inflammation modulation with gomacacia, for example, that we work on, and in IBS condition. And because of all of that, I think that the prebiotic ingredients can bring very beautiful advantages in the field, in this domain of X-biotic generation.
Thank you, Damien. I'm going to throw open the same question. I think I imagine Noah and Julie probably have some things to say. Noah's already off mute, so I'm going to pass to Noah first. But yeah, specifically on what Damien's been saying, I guess, and sort of that market positioning, wider market positioning of prebiotics. Where do you feel it is and where it's going?
Yeah, thanks, Nathan. I think from Olipop's perspective, why prebiotics? I think there's a big story that can be told from a consumer perspective. I think the biggest one is simply there's an increase in consumers' interest in supporting their digestive health. And we know that if you support your digestive health, it supports not only the gut microbiome, but potentially has implications throughout the rest of the body. Now that we're starting to learn more about gut-brain axis and other things. I think the other area is that most consumers just aren't getting enough prebiotics and fibers in their diet to begin with. If you look at kind of our hunter-gatherer ancestors, they were getting sometimes upwards of 10x more in their daily diet. And we're starting to notice that consumers are really resonating with that message and in wanting to find a really approachable, fun, delicious, nostalgic way to kind of get that into their diet. And from Olipop's perspective, we realize that you can't kind of be reductionist in just providing one. We know that the gut bacteria really support and have preferences for a variety of prebiotics. So that's why we've included a range of them in Olipop. in a meaningful amount, 9 grams per can, which is, from a US based fiber perspective, about a third of your daily fiber.
And I think Julie had maybe a few things to add there as well. She was off mute a minute ago.
No, it was just maybe the place of the prebiotic in the digestive health market, because this is a really strong market and a big market, but mainly dominated by the probiotic until a couple of years. And this market of digestive health is looking for new drivers, and prebiotics are definitely one of them, because it's like a new ingredient on the market, and consumers are always looking for new ingredients. So it's one of the reasons of the success of prebiotic, beyond the science also.
For sure, I completely agree with that, and it's something that we've seen and talked about quite a lot as GPA, is sort of this wider trend for digestive health and growing interest in the microbiome in general, everything microbiome, and certainly, obviously, probiotics led the charge there for sure, but prebiotics, fermented foods, and all sorts of other really interesting ingredients and categories are following in and really filling out that category space. So yeah, the prebiotics have got a really important part to play in that. Absolutely. I noticed Doug's also off mute, so I'm going to hand over to Doug. I think he's probably got something to add to this.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for allowing me to be part of this panel as well. I come to prebiotics or nutrition from a slightly different perspective. From the perspective of research, if you will, validation, substantiation, the utility of clinical trials. But I would like to start part of the conversation is, I think when we are discussing prebiotics, that we still have an educational gap. And that educational gap is meaning towards, is there a singular accepted regulatory definition of prebiotic yet? Is there a consumer acceptable definition of prebiotic? And not meaning like consumers have to say yes, 2 thumbs up, meaning that it confers what like the expert consensus papers say about prebiotic, and the consumers understand what it means. Because prebiotics, I believe, are basically substrates that can selectively be used by host microorganisms to confer a health benefit, leads a wide array of possibilities for prebiotic growth within the scientific world, meaning scientific advances of the knowledge of the health impacts or performance impacts or the cognitive impacts or quality of life impacts of prebiotic throughout the life cycle. And maybe to get a greater grasp of what is the average prebiotic intake in America. I'm only using US as an example here because that's where I live. No offense to anybody outside the US. But I know within the United States, about every decade or so, we have what's called the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey, the NHANES. And the NHANES nutrition published data through our government gives us a lot of insight of what are people actually taking in. And you can then do an estimated intake for the average intake of prebiotics daily, where it is, maybe compared to where hunter-gatherers may have had it, or where maybe a dose level related to health improvement might be, or promoting good health, I should say. And we can, over time, get that educational information out to the consumers, that why prebiotics are something else that they need to be aware of and include, and that it's nothing crazy. It's things that are already in your supermarket. It's things that are already in your health food stores. It's just understanding how to incorporate them in your diet for more than promoting a probiotics behavior.
Absolutely. Yeah, and this is something that actually came up in our first session for everyone watching. This is the second of 3 sessions today, Ask the Expert panel fireside chats. So in that first debate, we talked a little bit about regulatory status as well in different countries, and I'm going to ask Len to come in here actually and just provide a little bit of an overview of where we were with that and some of the things that we talked about there as well, if that's okay.
Absolutely. Thanks, Nathan. So it did come up earlier, and the regulatory status from a definition standpoint, there is no accepted regulatory definition of a prebiotic anywhere in the world currently, with the exception of actually India, which passed nutritional regulations a couple of years ago. And so in most areas, there is not an understanding from a regulatory perspective. Certainly in the United States, there is no regulatory definition of a prebiotic. There are some limitations, obviously substantiation. There is no accepted claims, or very limited accepted claims in Europe for prebiotics. I think we talked a little bit that there's a phosphinolin prebiotic associated stool related claim, not necessarily that helpful considering the entire body of science and applications. There's also, and this is the challenge that GPA is facing, getting this simple to consumers is part of the ticket. I mean, that's what happened and propagated probiotics into the mainstream. We do know from survey work that GPA has done that there is an opportunity, there's an interest in prebiotics, and that consumers across Europe as well as the United States are looking for prebiotic on the label. They're looking for combinations of pre and probiotics. There is some limited recognition of the term symbiotics. And all of these are against people that are just looking for fiber. So sometimes there's that association, but it is confusing and there's a lot of work to be done.
Thanks for that little snippet of highlight of our previous session. And I do just want to remind everyone listening in that if you are listening in on Zoom, you can obviously also, as well as typing in your questions, raise your hand and come to us live. We'd love to welcome someone to come in. We've actually got someone as well. That's wonderful. Thank you. In the meantime, I'm just going to talk about very quickly some of the upcoming work that we're actually starting with GPA relating to the definition of prebiotics. So this is something that we know there's already some wonderful work being done out there by organizations such as ISAP, and GPA has its own definition that we put out a couple of years ago now, but certainly it's a work package that GPA is pleased to be involved in. Is that we're now progressing with working with external scientists as well as our internal committees to start to develop a new definition and consensus agreement on the term prebiotics. Again, whether this will help to implement things like regulatory definitions is a completely different question and work package, but certainly on the scientific definition front, it's something that is ongoing, and I'm pleased to say that we are starting to drive again with new work at the moment. We do have a question from Stephen. So Stephen, are you hopefully able to join us?
Hi, yes I am. Can
Hi.
you hear me okay?
We can. Welcome.
Perfect. Yes, well, I sent a similar question in email, but I thought this was a great chance. I'm closer on the science side as well, but we have this obstacle of what is the definition between scientists, between regulatory agencies and consumers. This is maybe a leading question. How much do consumers really care that it is a prebiotic? Should we cut out the middleman and go straight to here's the value these things bring? We can, of course, differentiate ourselves by talking about what prebiotic it is, but I wonder if we can indirectly tackle this issue of a definition by just focusing on the benefits they bring to health.
I'm going to throw out to Noah first there. Yeah, there you go. He's already off mute.
Sure. Thanks, Stephen. Thanks, and thanks, Nathan. That's a really good question. You know, we've done some internal kind of consumer research ourselves, and I think obviously first and foremost, consumers are coming to different brands for the functional benefit. You know, they have a specific thing that they want to optimize, whether from a wellness perspective or from some condition that they're experiencing, and what they've been trying in their life so far hasn't matched what they need to make them feel better. But I also do think that, you know, consumers are becoming much more aware, particularly probably Gen Z and millennials. They're becoming much more label focused, and they're becoming much more ingredient focused. And so while I think ultimately function is going to be very important, and displaying that very prominently, on your label, whether it's in a beverage, whether it's in a supplement format or a food product, is going to be key. But, once they kind of go beyond that first packaging experience, liking the packaging, connecting with it on like kind of a visceral level, which is one of the things we found at Olipop, then they kind of move to the flavor profile. And then they kind of turn the pack around once they've had that, tasting experience, and they're surprised and delighted and like happy to have found something that maybe they couldn't have consumed before that fits also a functional thing that they wanted. So in the case of Olipop with soda, most people don't think that soda can be, healthy for you. And so once they realize that it kind of checks all those boxes and that they can get the digestive health and other microbiome health related benefits, they turn around and look what's in Olipop. And that's when they start to see the prebiotics. So I think that's important. I also think from an ingredient perspective, one of the things that we touched upon in the last question is kind of the evolution of why prebiotics are really starting to have this huge consumer uptick, huge media uptick. And I think there's a variety of factors. One, I think, probiotics paved the way for the microbiome product space and digestive health. But, recently there's been, whether you believe the science or you don't, there's been some kind of pretty high profile media stories that maybe have put into the consumer's consciousness some doubts about the full efficacy of it related to what they want. I also think that consumers are wanting to get their microbiome health related, digestive health related, immune health related things in a much wider ingredient format. And prebiotics are just a really approachable, easy way to do it. And then I think, prebiotics and increasing the use of prebiotics they're recognizing is more important. So while I think function leads the way as far as selection with consumers, I think they are very interested in what are those ingredients, where are they sourced, how are they sourced. And in our case, our philosophy is we want to let people know that prebiotics are found in real foods, which is why we don't list specifically the type of prebiotic. We typically list the food source, so people can be educated about where that prebiotic comes from a real food source, to make it really approachable and so they can understand it in their lives.
I would like to add some different type of perspective, because I'm not in the consumer business or consumer packaged goods space like you are from Olipop. I come from it from either a research and development scientific perspective, and I think when we're discussing is the term prebiotic something a consumer should know, should be educated about, does it matter? I think the answer is yes. And I think it's yes, not only for the consumer, but for companies like yours and others that are operating in this space, because you can also utilize, clinical studies or human-based research studies to learn about what the FDA would call structure-function relationships or potential benefits, from a product conducted in an appropriate manner, a product type study. I think a food-first approach is great, whether it's in the natural food, Jerusalem artichoke, or you are drinking an Olipop, or you're having an Uplift cookie, or some other format that these prebiotics come in. But I think that we cannot underestimate the ability to utilize science to drive your sales, to drive consumer awareness of potential benefits. Unfortunately, when we discuss things like microbiome, almost everything seems to affect the microbiome. And there's a gut microbiome, there's a skin microbiome, there's many different biomes throughout the human body. And prebiotics are one of the important digestive related, carbohydrate related ingredients, if you will, that we can get in our diet that can have a positive impact on the microbiome. But microbiome is still such in its infancy, just throwing around the word. People say, yeah, I'm interested, but they don't know why. So I like to look at what are some of the other immune supporting potential benefits. What are any of the other benefits related to a wide variety of other things, cardiovascular health, things that we've not yet really thought about for long-term life cycle use. So if somebody's an Olipop user, if you will, drinker, if they are drinking it almost daily over years, what, kind of thing like that can be positive for health, whether it's better blood sugar control, whether there's a satiety effect. And to me, that's an exciting time for industry, perhaps, to be able to merge with either academic research groups or contract research organizations to examine some of these questions. And then, both get it out there in the scientific world, and then the companies do what they do, explaining it to the consumers. I think this speaks prebiotic as an opportunity of advancing the diet forward, if you will.
Doug, I 100% agree. And that's, going back to, some of your previous comments as well, and Nathan and Len, kind of your background on the whole regulatory definition status. So, I think it's important that we have a regulatory definition, because it probably also helps paint some sort of construct for what type of science would be done to some degree. And we're noticing that, at least within the consumer packaged goods space, because there's a lack of a regulatory definition, some aren't being good stewards of the category and representing prebiotics accurately and putting it on their label when, it may or may not actually be in the product. So I think that's one. From Olipop's perspective, as far as the science, that's why we have a research advisory board led by some really top microbiome and prebiotic experts. We've actually just kicked off two in vitro kind of preclinical studies to really start understanding how our OliSmart functional blend, which powers essentially our Olipop product, can beneficially interact and support, kind of potentially metabolite related changes in the microbiome, both at Baylor and Purdue. And actually, our samples just arrived there. I checked our FedEx this morning before the webinar. So, we definitely believe in being good stewards of the category scientifically and from a regulatory perspective, and 100% agree that, brands, I think, have to take command of understanding how their product interacts, scientifically, whether that's relying on really strong industry partners that have really good science, or conducting their own kind of scientific research.
One other thing that I would offer is, depending upon the prebiotic that somebody may be using, I do believe there's an opportunity, given an FDA publication, back from June of 2018, on review of the scientific evidence on the physiologic effects of certain non-digestible carbohydrates, that depending upon which prebiotic you're using, if you can demonstrate that it has activity as described in this document, then that would enable or promote the forward thinking of, now you've identified a prebiotic that will also fit within this FDA paradigm of more than just being fiber or related to fiber, and the host of claims that are related to that then become available. So I think there's also opportunities for companies to do what I would call a little bit of discovery work. Does your prebiotic have any fiber-like behavior that you could characterize in animal models or human models or preclinical models, that would meet this? And I think that helps expand the business opportunity for companies like yours and others that operate anywhere within that space.
I do want to bring Damien in here, but I do also want to very quickly note that we've been talking a lot about fiber and carbohydrates quite a lot in this. And of course, the definition of prebiotic extends far beyond fiber and carbohydrates. So I do just want to make that clear for everyone listening in who is unsure of that. We've got a nice little mantra at GPA that obviously a lot of fibers do act prebiotically, but not all fibers are prebiotic, and not all prebiotics are fibers. And just wanted to make that statement before I hand it over to Damien.
Yeah, that's right. That's a good point. You should mention we cannot limit the prebiotic definition only for carbohydrate or fiber. Polyphenols and many other compounds, even omega-3 now is becoming a prebiotic. Just to continue in what Doug mentioned and Noah, I would like to ask a question to you. Yes, scientifically we want to make the link between prebiotic activities and mechanism and the benefit at the end, which benefit in which situation. But the question is, does our consumer care about what is the benefit, the final benefit, in which situation? Do they want to really know what is the end point at the end or not? Scientifically, we want to make the link and to demonstrate the health benefit at the end, but does consumer care really about that, this end point and the health benefit at the end? Or they just want to consider the prebiotic claim or wording?
I think it depends on the consumer personally. I think, we've got all sorts of different consumer groups, and this is something that, we've looked at quite a bit in the past as well and talked about is, the fact that, you've got so many different consumers who want so many different things, and it's difficult to target to every consumer, right? To every consumer group. So you've got to be really smart in your messaging. There are definitely going to be consumers out there who know the word prebiotic, want prebiotics, and are going to react to that. There are others that won't care whether it's a prebiotic or probiotic or whatever, so long as it has the benefit that they want or it tastes good or whatever. That's my personal view. I imagine Noah or Doug or Julie has probably got something to add there, but I did just want to throw mine in there as well.
I like your personal view.
Yeah.
Again, I think that since the definition since there's not one singular accepted definition yet for prebiotic, and that but the definitions offered by GPA and ISAP and others in the literature have some overlaps. I'm hopeful that that we can get some consensus, and then from that can help grow the understanding of prebiotics. For example, do polyphenols on their own have prebiotic behavior or effects on the host organism? And if they do, does that mean you can, look at foods and foodstuffs and dietary supplements and beverages differently? That's why this is also from an academic perspective, great areas for people that are interested in doing masters and PhDs in this aspects of nutrition and health. Because it can be everything from, some of the prebiotics can be delivered topically and confer a benefit onto the skin biome and onto skin health. And others can be used other forms in the body, and which the literature shows. So that's why it says to me that this still is an exciting area for a lot of growth in different areas.
Yeah, and there's as Doug's mentioned, and I think Noah's mentioned as well, the microbiome. Obviously, we're talking about the gut microbiome for the most part of what we're talking about, but microbiomes exist all over our body and all over the world that we live in, bacterial ecosystems, and the prebiotic concept extends to every one of those bacterial ecosystems, in that they all need inputs and ways to or substrates, as some definitions might call, that will drive changes and functionality. So that's all I wanted to mention. I think Noah's probably going to chip in with a little bit more there, and then we'll come to Julie as well.
Yeah, no, I think, Nathan, I think you really hit it on the head. I think it depends on, it depends on who the consumer is. We get consumers that write in with very, very specific questions or praise, and like they get down to the minutia of it. And then we have other consumers that are, just wowed that we're able to put, these prebiotics in a soluble format. Like they didn't know that before. Whereas for us, we're like, yeah, of course, there's a bunch of soluble prebiotics you can put into a liquid and it'll stay in solution. So I think a lot of it comes down to consumer messaging, making it really approachable. I think the average consumer, it doesn't fully get the whole story. And I think that's where really brands can kind of be that front line for educating the consumer in the world about why it's important to get prebiotics, how they benefit your body, digestively and beyond. So I think it really depends on the consumer. But we're noticing more and more that obviously with our reach and sales velocities, that consumers are starting to really latch on to prebiotics, microbiome, and a bunch of other functional categories.
Yeah, I think there's a big gap between the consumer comprehension and the manufacturers. Consumers, I think they link the prebiotic with digestive health very basically. And if you want to claim another benefit, you really have to explain and to prove this benefit. But maybe the consumer will not retain the term prebiotic. He will only focus on the benefits, because I think it depends on what he's looking for. And again, prebiotic is not well known yet by the consumers. still a misunderstanding between probiotic and prebiotic. So we have to remind that level of education are really different depending on the type of consumers also.
Great point. And we've had a question in actually asking about some of the drivers and challenges to the market, and I think you started to build on a few there, and some of the obstacles that the industry faces. So sticking with you, Julie, maybe you could just talk about some of the wider drivers and some of the opportunities and some of the challenges and obstacles facing the prebiotics category in general.
Yeah, I think as you said before, we have several kind of consumers. Some of them are maybe more educated, and for this part we can see on the market kind of a sophistication. We have maybe some consumers looking for specific strains or specific benefits. So this is what we call the microbiota awareness, which is really rising. During the last months also, we have seen appear a link between digestive health and immunity. So this is something we have been working on this topic for several years, especially with the leaky gut and the restoration of the gut barrier. But this is something maybe going mainstream today, the link between immune health and digestive health. And we also know that a lot of consumers recognize really the link between the digestive health and the general well-being. So this is also something interesting because they want to consume products which have health benefits for the digestive health in their daily diet. And so this is something also interesting for us as ingredient supplier and manufacturers. On the challenges side, we can say what we've already said, that the education is still to be made. We have to explain again and maybe to simplify the messages because we have to remind that when you talk to a consumer, when you talk about a prebiotic or digestive health, it's already a kind of a complicated message for the consumer. So we have to keep it simple and easy to understand. I think it's one of the part, and maybe it's the reason why the prebiotics are also rising in a different kind of product today. When you look at the applications, it's not only in supplements, it's also in beverages, in cereal bars, in yogurt, and it's maybe something easier to understand for the consumer.
Completely agree, and you hit an important point there actually, that the use of prebiotics extends well beyond supplements, and that's an important differentiator between, say, prebiotics and probiotics. Obviously probiotics are in drinks and bars and certain things like that, but certainly again, one of the things that came up in our first fireside chat was some of the core differences there, and the relative ease of formulation for prebiotics compared to, say, a probiotic, where you've got a live bacterial strain, you've got to deliver that strain to the gut intact. It's got to have good all sorts of interesting conditions for keeping it alive during storage and shelf life and that sort of thing. So prebiotics to some degree have a ream of benefits in that area as well, but also some challenges. So I don't know whether Damien or maybe Noah's got any additional thoughts on that side of things. Damien's on mute, but I think he wants to speak.
No. So which part you want to develop exactly?
I'm going to hand over to you. You develop whatever you want to develop, Damien.
Yeah, in order to try to continue this discussion, I think that there are very nice new domain which has been opened last maybe couple of years, and which is very beautiful to see how much the interaction in the gut can bring some potential health benefits. We have very three big systems which are interacting in the gut. We have the microbiota for sure, we have the mucosa wall, and then the immune system behind the mucosa wall, and then all neurons around that. So because of those three interactions, either four interactions and cross-talking between this tissue, a lot of health benefit can be assessed at the end. So it's very nice. There are beautiful demonstrations. A lot of them are kind of association between microbiota profile and metabolic health, or because of serotonin synthesis in the gut, in the colic mucosa wall, you have implication for the brain health, also for the motility and so on. So that's very, very nice. But the clear link between cause and consequence in all this cross-talking sometimes could be a bit tricky to highlight, and it's difficult to communicate what exactly is the science behind to consumer, or in order to highlight what could be the benefit on the product in the context of prebiotic. The word itself is not very known by the consumer. So how can we explain that because of serotonin modulation we can have an impact on the mood, or how can we address leaky gut syndrome in IBS, or metabolic syndrome, restoration of the impermeability or down regulation of cytokines in the mucosa wall for people suffering from metabolic health? I think that's probably the big challenge to clarify the message.
Yeah, Nathan, I would just add, from our end, being a beverage company, in the world where TikTok videos is basically the new attention span, you have to be able to make it so bite-sized. And I think there's ways to stay true to the science without watering it down too much. And I think there's ways to leverage very short, kind of information bites that then allow people the opportunity to explore more if they want to. So it's about understanding where consumers are at kind of in their knowledge journey, but then also providing them almost with like a choose your own adventure opportunity in the way that you communicate that. So, in Olipop, we try and, make things very accessible, understandable. As the science, one of the science people in the company, it's, mainly talking to people like you, we all understand it. So when I go to the marketing teams and in my eyes, tell them something I think is an easy story, they're like, no, that's actually a mega complex way to explain things. I'm like, man, I really thought I got this right. I thought I made it simple and easy to understand, but it's nice because our marketing and PR teams and our growth teams, really kind of help educate me to where the consumer is at, what they're ready to, no pun intended, digest from a prebiotic messaging perspective, from a functional perspective. And I think really it comes down to, just getting people excited enough to be curious to learn more, and then providing them with the resources, to be able to continue on with their curiosity, either through, obviously, the company's ecosystem of information, or, having partnerships with, the Global Prebiotic Association and say, hey, here's an independent group, if you want to show some objectivity as a brand, to say, hey, here's some information. It's not coming from us. These people are the leading, experts, as far as the industry, go check out what they're saying. Don't just trust, what we're saying is to be true. This is another independent third party.
Absolutely. Great points there. And it builds nicely on a question we've had in, and I know that we're running.
And it looks like Nathan is actually frozen there. I'm not sure exactly which question he was going to go to. Let me see. Nathan, are you back with us? I guess one of the questions that I see there on the screen is there are so many different types of prebiotics. What are the resources that you'd be recommending for consumers or brands to look to? I mean, obviously, self-declaration, Global Prebiotic Association considers itself a resource, but where do you guys point your brands, and ultimately you and Olipop, where else do you point your consumers?
Yeah, I mean, Len, I can take a first crack at that. Obviously we try and put out content, through our different social channels, but outside of that, obviously, you guys is something that I try and educate the team that, really leverage the Global, Prebiotic Association website, their definitions, some of their white papers, some of the infographics that you guys have put out, I think are really, really strong. The only other one I really like, which I also think is very consumer approachable, is Gut Microbiota for Health blog. They do some really good jobs as far as, talking about a wide range of microbiome and prebiotic related topics. Again, have some really approachable, I think, infographics. Those are pretty much the two core sources to start from. I think pushing people into a scientific paper or the scientific literature for most of the consumers is it's too big of a leap. And remembering how I was and trying to make sense of the vocabulary soup in the beginning of graduate school, it can be overwhelming initially. So you guys and then Gut Microbiota for Health are two resources that I've been sharing with the team and with friends and people that have asked me.
Damien or Julie, where do you point your brands when they're looking for additional resources to sort of get educated in this space?
Well, actually, this question, I'm not sure to be objective, because we provide the resource for our own ingredient. But I think the important point for maybe a brand or a consumer would be to have maybe something more than the scientific part and the scientific explanation, because we are still talking about an ingredient, and I think the consumer also wants to know where it comes from, have information about the sourcing, about the process of manufacturing, and these are all parts of the ingredient. So I think the sourcing, the transparency around the ingredient is also a very important part.
Absolutely. I know that we are probably coming very, very close to a wrap. One of the things that we have talked about in our technical committee are the gaps in the science and the difficulty in establishing both the mechanisms and then the connection between the prebiotic and the health benefit. Damien, I know that you and I have had this conversation. Doug, we've not had it directly. Noah, you've been part of those conversations. So I want to open it up. Whoever wants to chime in first, talk about what's good, what's the challenge, and what are the solutions in order to get that connection better established. Damien, why don't you go first? You're smiling the biggest.
Thank you, Len. Thank you. Well, actually, it's a very wide space, very wide field. There are many methods in order to work on the prebiotic activities. We have in vitro a lot of different techniques with more or less dynamic or constant system in a vessel, which try to mimic microbiota, and then with inoculum from human feces. We can see the microbiota-free germ mice, which is an in vivo model, probably more dedicated to specific condition and pathologies. And then we have all this demonstration in human, where we try to sample the feces, which is only representative of the finer part of the gut, and with specific problems like stability of markers we want to quantify in. So we have only a partial view of what is exactly the right microbiota in the column, because the feces is the ending part, as mentioned, and markers can be very rapidly degraded or either absorbed by the host, so you can even quantify that anymore. So the question is, what is the gold standard now? What is the connection with the health benefit at the end? A lot of work try to associate a microbiota profile with specific condition situation and try to quantify specific markers in festes or even in the blood, because in the blood you have some remaining part of microbiota which is crossing the mucosal layer, so you can try to quantify those microbiota profile or even other markers like cytokines. So it's a very beautiful world where we can demonstrate health benefits. We can try to highlight the mechanism of action. We have also this microbiota profile which can shift from bifidobacterium or lactobacillus, but we have other new strains coming like Faecalibacterium prosnitzi, Chrysantheracea. But we have also what I would like to call the gray strains, which are not good or bad, but in certain situations very good, in some other situations very bad. And so because of situation, sometimes it's difficult to make a clear conclusion on what this strain really bring to the host. So it's a kind of carrier, a puzzle of pieces when you try to cover a big quantity of markers, even in vitro system or even with metabolites, more than 1,000 metabolites, or even in human, you try to quantify a lot of markers in order to see what is the most significant, which has been modulated in the same time that the health benefit which has been proposed. And then you make some assumptions, but sometimes it's difficult to see consequence and cause.
Totally understand. Well, actually, I don't understand because that's how complicated it is. Doug, as the CRO on this, do you have some comments that you want to offer?
Yes, I would offer that there's been a lot of talk about the microbiota, a lot of talk about the microbiome, but prebiotics in general can confer a host organism a number of other benefits that are not just the makeup of your microbiome. And I think that if companies want to develop their own intellectual property for the either the ingredient they supply to the industry or the finished product or both, for those type of other benefits, taking a look at what is the impact of including this prebiotic in the daily diet of either food, supplement, or beverage of a human on mood states. What is it on some of the other areas regarding human health? I think there's a whole host of opportunity to take what's known already and what is speculated, and then to turn that into different organ or body systems or parts of the body to take a look at how can prebiotics have an effect and are they positive in this area? Again, whether it's mental health, whether it's cardiovascular health, whether it is sleep quality, whether it is more than just bowel habits, things like this. I also think that it would be unique to look at what is the impact of prebiotic intake on certain genomic and proteomic markers, things that express themselves in their body that then lead to either different health states. So I see a time here that is what I would think an opportunity for the ingredients part of the prebiotic industry, the prebiotic finished product makers, and scientists and researchers all to be able to work together for synergy, for symbiotic positivity growth of understanding of not only mechanisms of action, but outcomes in humans and different ways that this can be applied for promoting good health throughout the life cycle.
Awesome. Thanks, Doug. And to conclude that part of the question, Noah, you want to talk a little bit about the gaps, opportunities, challenges, and things coming together and what you see is needed over the course of the next couple of years from clinical programs, technology, those types of things.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Len. I think, really to kind of dovetail off of what Damien and Damien shared and Doug shared, I think, moving beyond just the microbiome markers is going to be really important because as we kind of have all kind of touched upon in some way consumers potentially first and foremost are interested in function. And so while the microbiome plays a role potentially in that function, the human host, us, as the carrier of our microbiomes, also have, a lot of cells and tissues that, prebiotics, support and help. And there's other ways of looking at things. I think there's some novel in vitro kind of models that could be used. I think you have to be very intentional from a brand perspective, because sometimes the studies can take a little bit of time. And if some of those trends have moved on and you've invested some of your R&D dollars in something that maybe isn't as future forward thinking, it can be a little problematic. But I also think, the concept of, consortia-based approaches to thinking about prebiotics and how potentially a consortia of prebiotics might feed, certain groups of bacteria that you want to isolate, because, if you optimize those bacterial species, it might optimize a certain functional condition or metabolites to be produced in higher amounts, which then can confer something either from a functional position or specifically in some sort of host interaction. So I think with technology, the cost of learning and getting more information, increasingly going down from sequencing to metabolomic costs, going down, it's only going to basically make the data sets, learning more about the interactions of prebiotics with the body and with the microbiome increase, which just gives us more opportunity to communicate and formulate in some really novel and innovative ways.
Thank you, Noah. That's been thank you to Len for stepping in there and moderating for a couple of minutes when I had a slight tech issue, but I've been back and listening in for a good while now, and some really great points. One thing I did just want to mention to wrap up before we unfortunately have to end is also the work that GPA is doing in terms of pulling together a lot of the clinical research and science that's happening. So we are in the process of building a really great database for science and clinical studies. So that's something that is an ongoing process and will be a really great resource once we're finished with it. But it is an ongoing process, and something I did just want to very quickly call out at the end there. But unfortunately, that is all we've got time for. We still have a few questions which unfortunately we didn't get to, but hopefully we'll be able to put those into our next session, which is coming up in a couple of hours. So I think it's 1 p.m. is it Eastern, 7 p.m. UK is the next live session. So please do be aware of that, and join us if you can for that final Ask the Expert session. Once again, a huge thank you to Damien, Julie, Noah, and Doug for joining myself and Len today for this hour-long Ask the Expert session this afternoon for me in the UK and for this morning for everyone in the US. We hope that you can join us for future sessions, and please do remember just to check over social media and check back all of the other ones. This morning should be available on demand soon, and as are all of our webinars from previous months as well, which we've referred back to a few times in both this and this morning's session. So do check those out. But for now, thank you so much for joining us, and we look